Yeah, I've had an indication from Jetta.
Yes, I agree in general with all what John said. This is interesting because this indicates that even we are not in a community communication regularly, it's still we still belong to the same international tendency. This is interesting. My question is, how do we look at the I mean, the ST is too small today, but how do we look at the standing on for election by revolutionary parties, using this as mainly as a propaganda tool? How is the position on this?
So people can ask questions or make talking points. So John may want to come back directly on something, or we may just let the discussion run for a while and sort of build up some points that John can respond to. So just anyone who's on camera, just indicate with their hand, and anyone who's off camera, just use the Zoom icon to indicate. Yep, Chris.
John drew attention to the strike wave that's burgeoning in the US, and I agree completely. It's spectacular numbers that they're dealing with. There's 10,000 workers have walked out at the John Deere factory, and there's like 3,500 workers in the supply chain for that are also in dispute. There's health workers, there's workers that are casual workers, and they're actually, it's very contradictory because some people are fighting to get into the union, and quite a lot of the traditionally unionized jobs, they're actually fighting with the union over deals that they have already negotiated. For example, we had a strike here a few months ago, or sorry, we didn't have a strike. We had a ballot on a pay deal by the bus workers in Dublin, and something like 96% of them voted no to the deal that had been negotiated by the union bureaucracy. Very, very similar things happen in the US, where you get big unions that are long established. United Auto Workers, for example, is one of them. And they're going in there negotiating these deals, and the workers are so disgusted with them that they're rejecting them by 98 and 95 and 90% margins, you know. At the same time, there's other workers in non-union jobs that are trying to establish a trade union. But it's exposing, and especially in this country, I think, the role that the trade unions played in ensuring class peace, you know, where struggle after struggle was quelled and dampened down, and workers sent back to work, and all the time conditions and pay and everything else was being salami sliced. So I think that when we talk about presenting demands on what workers' needs are, that there is quite a layer of the working class that are showing themselves willing to come forward and put up some sort of a struggle on that.
Okay. So is anyone else who wants to come in with a question or a discussion point? Yeah, Liam.
This is a rhetorical question for John. Right, yeah. Essentially, there's two ways you create a mass revolutionary party. Right, one is right, big splits from existing formations, social democracy, and you know, I think that with the Corbyn movement, you did see a glimpse of that potential. The other is, you know, sort of molecular recruitment of forces and maybe the coalescence of a few smaller radical currents. In the Irish situation, where would John argue is the more likely source of the Mass Revolutionary Party?
All right, so we've had a few questions there and a few people making points. So, John, do you want to come back on anything that's been raised so far?
Okay, I'll come back. First, I'll correct you, Chair. Yetta's name is Yetta. I was put right about that some time ago. Okay, and she asks, what position does standing in elections have? Well, and is it just propagandistic? I'd say no. I would say that the orientation of revolutionary socialists is always towards the self-independence of the working class. So even when you're standing in elections, you're standing on a platform calling for the workers to organize separately from the official council or Dáil or parliament and so on, and to set up their own structures. It gets a bit more tricky when you're asking workers to vote for someone else. And generally, the historic discussion has been you can vote for social democratic parties, but even then, you're not saying you support them. You're saying, as Lenin said, you're suggesting you support them as the rope supports the hanged man. And then once you get away from social democracy, are there grounds on which generally the way to resolve that is that if you focus on the program, so you're not voting, if a Labour Party volunteered to bring in mass public housing, you wouldn't be voting so much for the Labour Party, but for the program of mass public housing. And you would be asking workers to mobilize independently to make sure that promise was kept. And I think there are limits. That's the thing I want to say is Sinn Fein aren't a socialist party, they're a capitalist party. They're a party in an imperialist administration in the north where they cooperate with one of the most right-wing forces in Europe. And they're fairly tightly tied to donors, leading figures in US imperialism. So the idea that you can get anywhere by urging a vote, that doesn't mean you can't pressure them, but I don't think there are any conditions where you would call for a vote for Sinn Fein. And I think that's one of the difficulties of the general left currents in Europe, is that they started off with, possibly Alan could tell us later, the Scottish Socialist Party. For a while, the SWP were over here, were telling us to speak Scots, and then later on they said we should speak Greek, and then they said we should speak German, and that has led to a progression where they're saying we should speak US imperialism and quietly support Joe Biden without saying we're doing it. So that's one element. The US unions in Dublin bus. I think the difficulty with the Dublin bus vote is we see the anger of the workers, we see their rejection of the terms that are being offered, but we don't see independent organisation. What we've got to remember is that the Dublin bus unions got the Dublin bus workers to vote 6 times for a programme a couple of years ago. And each time the workers rejected it. The unions would bring it back, change a comma here, a dot here, and hand it back to them. And eventually the workers just got tired, and the unions stepped up the rhetoric and said, if you agree to this, downgrading of your conditions. You save the service from privatization. Of course, the exact opposite was the truth. The changes were being introduced to bring about privatization, and this latest vote is to accelerate the process. The thing is that there's been anger all the way along since the Fianna Fáil government bankrupted Ireland, and since the Fine Gael and Labour agreed to the rule of the Troika, for the Troika to take over the economic management of the country and apply swingeing austerity. But people haven't come up with an alternative. And the reason they haven't come up with an alternative is nearly everybody sees Ireland as dominated by imperialism, and they don't see a way out of that. And in the past, there was very large movements. I mean, at one stage, Ireland led Europe in strike days, but that was by workers newly moving in from the country, newly unionized and not willing to put up with bad conditions. And actually social partnership, the agreement between the government, bosses and unions, was very largely designed to stop that sort of thing, and it was effective. Strike numbers fell like a stone once the bureaucracy had total control of that process. In a similar way, a very large section of the Irish population agreed with the idea of the Irish people struggling against imperialism. But that all stopped dead when they voted for the Good Friday Agreement, because after that, imperialism was the good guys. They were the people who brought peace to Ireland, and they were the neutral forces, making sure that everything was okay. So on both those levels, people talk about the defeat of the working class, changes in consciousness, but they are real things. There was this incredibly unpleasant civil, sort of semi-civil wars, a dirty war in the north, and it ended. And if you told people we want to return to something like that, they would run away from you, and they're willing to settle for a sectarian society where things are fairly quiet. So it takes a long time to overcome these major defeats. So the last question really is, I don't really agree with Liam, no matter how rhetorical he's been. I think what it is my own view of Corbynism is it was basically the broad left party inside the broad left, not so left party. It looked very like a lot of the other mobilizations around Europe where people tried to find alternatives and failed. And that failure's been fairly acute because the Corbyn base, to a large extent, was made up of young people who joined the Labour Party to support him. And they've all left in droves, or many of them have left in droves now that that movement has been crushed. So the way I look at it is this, is there going to be a new mass party of the working class? That depends on the working class. There's no mechanism by which individual lefties can manipulate the workers to take that position, or educate them, or talk to them, or propagandize. The circumstances when workers rise up is either when they're in a strong position, where, which is to a certain extent true in various areas at the moment, where they can sort of start asking for real wages. That's a stronger position than they've been in for a long time. And the other position where they can raise up is when conditions get so terrible that it's not really in prospect just to keep living along the same line. Now, the problem for socialists is they keep trying to wave their hands and take charge of the workers, and that's not really our job. Our job is to try and say, explain to people what the situation among the classes is, and what we think the workers should do. And it's harder to do that in reverse than it is when you're driving forward, but it's the same task. So that's really all I can say about that.
All right, so we'll move back into the discussion. So again, anyone who wants to ask a question or make a talking point, just if you're on camera, indicate with your hand, and if you're off camera, just use the hand icon in Zoom. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah. I think with the left party, the parliamentary strategy. I mean, a lot of the time, socialists or revolutionary socialists even will talk about we'll talk about it's not about the parliamentary road, and yeah, they really are just speaking in the abstract, because what happens is for example, what's happened in the South is once the revolutionary left parties had a few MPs or TDs, as they're called, they really became electoral kind of machines in a way. Not machines, but they put all their efforts into bigging up the fact they had TDs, and that's not really the revolutionary strategy of building a party. So really they're failing at the first stage there. They shouldn't really be happening, because those people are aware of the fact that they would say, well, we need a working class, a strong working class party, and also you need a strong working class as well, organized working class, much more than we have now. I mean, I hate to go back to examples of Russia, but in 1917, but it's not just about 1917. There are examples of very large revolutionary parties embedded within the working class, and those things that was an organic kind of relationship. Now we don't really have that anywhere. I mean, we don't really have that anywhere in the world. No. You may have large communist parties and things like that, but they're very much, kind of very much institutional kind of, they've always been, from the Stalinist background, really, that kind of thing. And they're not actually truly interested in organizing, a sort of a revolutionary, tendency in a way. But but this is the thing. They're really that doesn't exist. So basically, what I'm saying is, if that what they need to basically understand in a way that it's counterintuitive in a way, because that's it has become counterintuitive, the idea of starting to build within the working class, and the trying to raise demands to the working class, so and that doesn't really exist. But so the strategy of going into Parliament is really very what happens is, then you start saying, well, vote for us, whereas you really should be organizing in the working class. So yeah, it may seem, but that's the thing, because that seems difficult, and it seems, that there wouldn't be a very, in these social media days, that wouldn't be a very good way of publicizing yourself in the media as well. That's why there's a very dangerous situation where that whole idea of that what you need is a strong, organized working class. That has been abandoned, really. So it's up. Well, anyway, I'll just leave it there anyway. Sorry, I was a bit stilted, but anyway.
Yeah, I've had an indication from Alan. You need to unmute. Yeah, you need to unmute.
Muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's good. Thanks. My name's Alan Armstrong. I'm sitting here in Edinburgh, in Scotland at the moment. John mentioned me in relation to one of the parties he talked about earlier. The Scottish Socialist Party is one of the sort of broad left parties that has failed. I'm not actually going to deal with that, although I'm quite happy, and if anybody has any questions about that, to deal with that specifically, but actually look at something else which perhaps is shared between us in Scotland and you in Ireland. In fact, people throughout these islands. I mean, a lot of your criticism, and quite rightly, targeted at the SWP and the Socialist Party and their various front organisations, People Before Profit, Anti-Austerity Alliance. But the one thing that does seem to be very much part of a weakness of the left, which came very obvious to us over Brexit, is the natural fact, it's not just the Communist Party that has an idea of a national road to socialism. It turned out that the SWP and the Socialist Party were very eager Brexiteers disguised as Lexiteers, and it's provided cover for the massive shift to the right in politics in the UK. In Ireland and in the Republic, actually the two organisations actually stood out in a limb as well, along with the CP, also very much in favour of Brexit going ahead as an inspiration for an Irish exit. Now, just looking across the whole of Europe and whole of these islands and the whole of the UK, one other major thing that seems to have got lost is the idea of genuine internationalism. That even you're part of the Fourth International. I don't see evidence that the Fourth International organises across Europe to defend the rights of migrant workers or things like that. So, but it's obviously much worse the case with those parties like the SWP and the Socialist Party, which in actual fact think that Brexit's a good idea. So I'd just be interested in your take on on that. I'll put it on the chat box, a couple of my own articles and things like that for links to that. But I'd be very interested in what John's take is on the left and Brexit and exit. Thanks.
Right. So anyone else want to come in? So again, just indicate with your hand if you're on camera, and if you're off camera, just use the Zoom icon, the hand up icon. So we're about 25 minutes into discussion. So I'm just going to go around one more time, just ask
Can I come in now? Because it tends to get broken up if there's too many things to answer.
Yeah, well, John, if you want to, well, you can come back, and then we'll just go, after you come back, we'll go one more round and then move into the summary.
Okay. I'm going to deal first with Derek, who has a written statement in the chat zone, so you can look at that. And Derek's asking, he has the opinion that many working people see themselves as middle class, and I think the best answer I can give to them, You know, why would people vote? That's not, people don't stop voting left because they've become middle class, in my opinion. It's the other way around. It's when the left fail them and they lose that confidence of the idea of class as a way of being together with others and defending yourself, that they start describing themselves as middle class and then acting in more individual ways. Now, the thing is, people may feel that, but every day that goes by, larger and larger proportions of wealth drain out of Ireland into international companies and into the bank, and Ireland gets poor. And in Ireland itself, the concentration of wealth has gone into overdrive, and a very small section of the population now own the vast section of national wealth. Now, how does that play out in everyday life? It plays out in everyday life in that, you know, the things that I listed: housing. If you've already got a mortgage and you've had for some way, you're not directly affected by the housing crisis. But most of these people have children, and the children are now living with them. They're paying health insurance, but the health insurance doesn't guarantee a good health service. Rather the opposite. And there's things happening like this, the issue of the women's question, the issue of the church that everybody says no longer is anyway important. Turns out it's running a large section of the health service. All of these things impact on people's everyday lives. And a good example is America. America has been in that situation for tens of decades. You know, everybody's middle class because the workers were so heavily defeated that nobody could imagine what being a worker was anymore. But things, you know, it's still a class struggle. So the class struggle in America tends to express itself through things like Black Lives Matter, where you know, Black people find themselves at the bottom of the working class, and therefore the ones most desperate and most urgently pushed to fight back. So I think that's the best I can do for the moment, but that's the general position I would take, right? Now, Dave addresses the thing about, you know, people going into Parliament and that sort of thing. And I'd say two things, and he touched on something else. So I'll just tell him one story, which is, I remember reading donkeys years ago in The Socialist Worker. They did a history series where the miners were invited to Windsor Palace for negotiations. And one of them wrote in delight to his wife, "The Prince of Wales has just come in and put some coal on the fire." And the fellow writing the article saying, "Well, that boy's finished as a trade union activist. You know, he's now an admirer of royalty." And I think, you know, what it is this: the effect of bourgeois institutions, of parliaments, of committees, of institutions, of bureaucracies. These are all tendencies. And the only tendency you have in the opposite direction is the tendency of working class action. So the root of all our problems is that the working class has been driven back, but that's not the fault of the working class. We can't turn around and say, "You're no use. We're going to take up some other group and they have the revolution." They haven't found the weapon and the tool that they can lay hold of that would convince them. Because you must remember, when workers go into struggle, what's happening is they're putting their livelihood on the line. You know, they're not going on a demonstration and risking a day in court and a couple of days in the jug. They're risking their lives, they're risking the lockout, they're risking having a family that's starving in front of their eyes. So there's no surprise that workers are reluctant to engage in full-scale struggle. And what we have to do is do our best to provide the instruments that can make that possible. Oh yes, one other thing about what Dave said. I'm concentrating on a tiny element of class analysis. But when people say, have the workers gone away? One of the things that's happened is the globalization of production. So, and capitalism has two elements. One's called production of value, and the other is called the realization of value. An enormous amount of the production of value is now concentrated in China. So in China, there's this mass concentration of workers. Now, they don't have self-determination, but the Chinese Communist Party are very frightened of them. And, you know, people say this iron dictatorship, but in actual fact, things break out all the time. And when there's a fight, the Communist Party has to say, are we going to crush the workers here? And how much will that, what will that do? Or will we bump off the local bureaucrat who's railed them up and bring in a local reform? And very often that's what happens. They get rid of the local bureaucrat and bring in some local reform. So I'm not saying that they're progressing. I'm saying they're always thinking of the danger that sits at their rear because there's this mass organized working class in existence. And now some people go on to argue that, well, there's no class struggle in the West, but of course that's ridiculous. There's a class struggle and we're losing it, you know. That's a more realistic assessment. But a lot of it now is focused in the realization of wealth. But that doesn't mean workers are helpless, you know. So the latest big crisis in England, for example, is shortage of transport workers, and that's a real source of power for the working class and a real indication to people that there's something to this free movement of labour across borders. And finally, to Alan's point, yes, it turns out, so the thing is that British social democracy and social democracy generally is a nationalist phenomena. So if these people have just latched on to that nationalist situation, they're very often nationalists themselves. And that is, you know, Alan's absolutely right about that. You can see that Brexit exposed them as people who were, you know, tied. And sorry, one last point, which is, of course, British social democracy is a product of British imperialism. That's where the profits came from to buy off sections of the working class. So that's a theoretical failure. It's, you know, and it's ridiculous in Ireland where the vast majority of the Irish population look at Lexit and have no interest whatsoever, even in the north, where you have this big unionist base. The majority of the northern population support remaining in Europe. So even in this utterly reactionary place, there's this resistance to the idea of Singapore on Thames and a strong deregulated return of the British Empire. I don't know if I can say anything more about that. You know, these people have failed. There's other issues. I think the difficulty is that the Brexit case, I think, is utterly reactionary. But essentially the only thing that countered it was support for Brussels. And that also, it's not just as reactionary, but we're not dancing on our toes between two forces of reaction. You know, our position was that the only response was a united socialist states of Europe. And another thing that hasn't been fed into the equation is Brexit wasn't a thing in itself. Brexit was part of the disintegration of the European Union. And a couple of interesting things happened from Brexit. One was that a lot of far-right formations who were pressing for their own form of Brexit moved away from that. They sort of said, we can see how chaotic and ridiculous this is, and we don't want to get deeply involved in that. But that doesn't mean they stop being right-wing xenophobes. What we've got is things like Poland, where this guy says we're going to stay in the European Union, but it doesn't involve us in making any concessions to human rights or anything like that. In fact, rather the opposite, we're turning everything we can up and building a new ultra-nationalist Poland, and it's up to you whether you do something about it. And of course, the overwhelming failure of the European Union was the migrant crisis. So you started off with one young dead baby on a beach, and everybody going boo-hoo. How can that be allowed to happen? And people being shoveled into concentration camps now all across Europe. Priti Patel said she's going to sink them in the sea, basically. And the only thing I say about that, I haven't got the full answer to that, but the thing is, you've got the Statue of Liberty in New York, and bring me your starving and all that. It's not because America is a nice place or that migrants were treated well. It's that individual workers were valuable, right? If you got a worker to the US, you could plug them in to a capitalist society and extract value. And the fundamental crisis of Europe is you've got these tens of thousands of people who would work for a cup of tea, and Europe isn't able to extract value from them. And what that means is that European capital is on its last legs.
All right, so just before the summary, I'm going to go around one more time in the discussion. So yeah, so I've got an indication from Yara and an indication from Derek. So I'll just take Yara first.
Thanks. On the balance of class forces, there's just lately a very interesting strike has been taking place in Denmark. It's a strike of nurses, and I think they generally would describe themselves as middle class. The strike is on equal pay. There's has been a historical development whereby all women in the public sector are paid relatively too low wages compared to other groups of workers. These women, I think about 50,000, have been against their union leadership, 2 times voting down the general agreement results, and they have been going on strike for 9 weeks. When they were at the end of these 9 weeks, the government intervened and forbid the strike. After that, they went on strike in different parts of the country. As a result of that, according to the Danish non-strike system, they were fined almost 12 EU currents per hour and they still continue to make these punctual strikes. I mean, I think we should not see the consciousness as only an ideological phenomenon. It's a material phenomenon. It's the fact that they are fighting in this way, even if they are an isolated group. We normally say isolated groups are not going to win anything in this period, but the fact that they're actually reaching out to I think about 70% of the population, which is in support of them, means that the government is not going to be able to ignore the question of underpaid women workers in the public sector for the next period. They will have to take up this and to give concessions. And I think this is telling us something about the nature of the class struggle at this moment. And it's also telling us something about the workers' consciousness, ideological versus material consequences. I think I'll just say very shortly something about the left parties. The Red-Green Alliance in Denmark was built in '89. It was a right-centrist left reformist party. It was built only with the purpose of the left being represented in parliament. I think what has happened is that, and I think that was bound to happen, is that the parliamentary group has taken over the control of the party, attacking the internal democracy, making deals with the social democratic minority government. And I think the only way you could have any positive result from building this type of party is what the Danish section did not do, and which the FI leadership internationally did not advocate, to actually represent in that party a revolutionary Marxist current, and to in that party to fight the reformists, trying to educate, and by putting up alternative proposals in a non-sectarian way, but always looking at the interest of the class, to answer the big questions of the class. You should be able, in my mind, to actually attract and regroup the best elements in these parties, because many of the people who join these parties subjectively look upon themselves as genuine socialists. They are without theory, they are without strategy, they are in fact sort of centrist. But if the revolutionaries in all these parties, in Die Linke, in Syriza, in the Podemos, if the FI people who have been there for scores of years, if they had worked as revolutionaries in these parties and not adapted to them, which was what they did, I think we would be standing now with the critical mass of revolutionary parties in these countries. I'm pretty sure. So now the situation is that that these parties are sort of playing very, very bad roles, and they are being counterproductive relating to the class struggle. I mean, they are actually harming the class struggle. It's not only that they are sort of neutral people in the parliament. They are in the parliament harming the class struggle. So so you can understand my feelings about these left reformist parties with my experience from the Danish situation. And right now they have been, the fact that the USFI section in Denmark has been in this left reformist party for 31 years means that the majority of the leadership of this Danish section has been infected with reformism. They have become reformist, and it means that the section is in a very, very severe crisis. There's only like about 20% of the active members who are genuine left revolutionary comrades. So that's also part of the struggle of the left and of our struggle, I think, also in the FI. So thank you.
All right, so Derek.
Yes, my point in putting up that little piece in the chat there was to start people talking, but they don't really seem to have taken up much of what I thought might stimulate response. This is a numbers game, really. I mean, I think that the last 30 years in Ireland, and I tend to be quite parochial about talking about Ireland a lot and not so much what happens in other places, but we've been softened up all through the 80s and 90s. Irish governments there sold off and created a shareholding population. People bought shares in telecom and other such things. And I think that there's been a drift where people that would have been in working class situations became middle class. Now, I take John's point there that you don't become middle class if you're working class. I was brought up in a working class house. I own my own home now, but I still consider myself to be working class. I didn't shift. But the thing about it is that we've got these situations now where our health services are under attack because of privatisation and governments supporting through the tax measures the setting up of these luxury clinics. And of course, because our own health service has deteriorated through this, people are forced to take up private health insurance, even though for some of them it's no use at all. And we still have 900,000 people on waiting lists. So it really is, as I say, 30 years of being softened up and becoming sort of softer in so much as many people own their own homes now. The number of people brought up in council houses is probably decreased. I live in Galway, where typically we had a number of large housing estates, but people have bought their homes from the council. So the number of people that are actually paying rent to local authorities is much less in percentage terms than it used to be. So people have been softened up. They're not really sort of thinking about hard left or following socialists in terms of their politicians, their councillors or their TDs. And of course, we started off the discussion about how we might get or achieve a left government. Well, I weary that we're ever going to see that in our lifetime. I mean, I haven't got that much left to go, no more than some of us. But it's looking further and further into the distance. We've become a consumer society. Mention has been made there of most of our produce coming in from the Far East. We don't grow as much as we used to, all this kind of stuff. You know, people had allotments and they considered themselves lucky to be able to grow their own stuff. But it's very messed up and it's very hard to see how people are going to support any left government, because, as has been said, I mean, Sinn Fein are hardly a left party as such. So I worry about achieving any kind of a socialist government at all. That's just, I'm not involved with any political party at the moment. I toyed with the Labour Party for a while and run as a local councillor here 20 years ago, didn't get in, but I drifted away from them because they weren't my kind of Labour party. So that's it. I just wanted to make those points, see if I could stir up a little bit of argument.
All right, thanks.